Also, I was looking at your videos on the Anapana Party Sutta. Um, Specifically, I've only watched a little bit of the first one. I'm planning on transcribing them.
Hmm.
Yeah, if you, because I find generally it's a good way for me to pick up information, and then other people can benefit from it too later.
All right. If you're going to do that, you might want to experiment with voice to text,
Yeah,
and
I've
then you can go through and correct it and make it a lot easier for you.
yeah, I've been right now. I'm at the point of transcription. It's a bit hodgepodge. It's not the best.
Okay.
Still learning it. Okay, so here we
All
go.
right. So, um, this is your first time actually, and I mention that only because this tape or this video may eventually make it on air or onto YouTube. So, the way that I would like to start with this with you is to tell you that most teachers teach a combination of two stages of Buddhism that we will refer to as number one is the Buddhist religion, and
Hmm.
number two is the noble Buddha Dhamma.
Right. Okay.
All right, and that under Achan Po's direction
Hmm.
with these Skype calls, that I will teach only and directly the noble Dhamma, the super mundane Dhamma.
Right. Yeah.
And a lot of what you have been taught will also have ordinary Dhamma in
Hmm.
it. Now the Buddhist religion is not the Buddha Dhamma in the following ways. One is that the Buddha Dhamma is not a religion. The Buddhist religion is clearly a religion. That's why I call it a religion.
Right.
Number two, no religions are liberating.
Hmm.
There are no liberating religions, though all of them promise.
Hmm.
For instance, in Christianity, they promise if you take Jesus as your Savior, then you will be free from sin and the wages of sin. Now, the
Hmm.
word wages there is exactly in Pali, we almost always use the word fruit as a translation,
Okay.
but fruit and wages are the same. So the Christians say that if you do a ceremony and take Jesus as a Savior, then perhaps a week later, that guy who did that ceremony can come back to his preacher and say, you know, it worked. I have been completely free from sin and completely free from any results of sin for
Right.
this past week. And yet no one ever says that.
Right. So that's
Which
belief in rites and rituals, correct?
That's rites, rules, and rituals. Well, the Buddhist religion has rites, rules, and rituals. One of them is taking the triple gem, and the other one is the precepts.
Right.
All right. But in fact, rites, rules, and rituals is a fetter, and yet the Buddhist religion teaches fetters.
Hmm. That's interesting.
Okay. And that's the way that monks experience it. And so teaching the supramundane Dhamma is the intention of Bhikkhu Buddhadasa. And he's
Right.
much more interested in people knowing the Dhamma, the Buddha Dhamma, that's liberating than he is in ordination.
Right.
However, Cha, one of his students, was much more interested in the ordination and getting a Western Sangha established.
Right.
There are reasons and rationales why it was started the way that it was, and part of that has to do with the fact that Thai people are chauvinistic just like Westerners.
Right. Yeah.
Okay?
Hmm.
And that part of the chauvinism, it actually goes in two ways. One way it goes is about money, education, knowledge, etc., and the Thais feel inferior. But when
Mhm.
it comes to morality
Mhm.
and understanding and philosophy, the Thai people rightly feel more superior.
Mhm.
Therefore, the Thai monks and the Westerners, or excuse me, the Thai people who support the Thai monks, the lay community, are, um, let us put it this way. The statement is phrased in the following way. Why don't the Farang, which is the Thai word for Westerners, why don't the Farang practice Dhamma in their own country?
Okay.
All right.
Mhm.
Well, the answer to that, well, why would a Thai person go to a particular temple in Thailand? And that's it. All right. The answer is that the question does not need an answer. It needs to be pointed out that the question is chauvinistic.
Right.
But that's not a possibility when you're talking about establishing something new in a community,
Mhm.
an entire society that is chauvinistic. All right. So what that means is that if Achan Cha is going to have as a first one Samedo, he has got to very much impress upon Samedo that Samedo must be a good monk up to Thai people's standards.
Right.
All right.
Yeah.
Therefore, when Samedo taught his students, he taught them in that same way so that what Pabong and what Panana Chat could survive.
Right.
All right. So what that meant was that they became attached in that lineage to Sila Bhatta Paramasa. That's
Mhm.
the attachment to rites, rules, and rituals, because if they cannot get these Westerners to attach to these rules and be able to keep them well, then then the new society of monks will not be supported by the Thai community.
Ah. Okay.
All
Okay.
right, so, but that was not the case with Bhikkhu Buddhadasa. He was much more interested in that the students learned the noble Dhamma. So
Okay.
one was interested in keeping the Sangha alive as Sangha to make a Western Sangha, and in many, many ways, Achan Cha was successful,
Very.
perhaps more successful than Bhikkhu Buddhadasa,
Yeah.
who had the intention of, we don't care whether you ordain or not. What we care about is that you become noble,
Right.
that you make the change of lineage, that
Right.
you really understand what the real teachings of the Buddha are.
Right.
So this is the approach that I take through Bhikkhu Buddhadasa with, and then I add all of the other teachers that I've had. And in fact, one of the main teachers that I have is these two dogs laying on the floor. Because if you really want to understand how humans operate in the sense world of, um, there's four modes of clinging. These four modes of clinging are attached directly to the four, um, uh, the Buddha calls them underlying tendencies. These underlying tendencies of the Buddha can be mapped one on one, time after time, in so many ways back to the four primary instincts that the scientists figured out about 100 years ago. Okay, and that is the self-preservation instinct, the procreation instinct, the nesting instinct, and the territorial instinct. These are the four modes of clinging with the Buddha.
Okay then.
All right, so I do a lot of Western psychology, Western neuroscience, and all of that, but I only use all of that stuff in service of the Buddha Dhamma.
Well, it's interesting you say that, Dhammarato. I actually am doing psychological research right now, so feel like we might have some common ground there because that's sort of the approach I take to. I see psychology as a tool to sort of realize to help realize these things about the mind rather than it being like an inherent truth itself. It's more just a way to better understand, perhaps at a more mundane level.
Perhaps that's number one, is mundane. Number two is diagnostic. It's not
Right,
curative.
right.
Okay, that psychology, even Freud talked about it like that, that he's interested in research. He's not interested in a cure.
Right.
And so that's been the intention of psychoanalysis through the medical system.
Hmm.
Has always just assumed, oh, well, we've got some pills. All we have to do is just diagnose you, get the right pills, and off you go, and thank you for all of that money.
Yeah.
All right. Well, where the psychologists, they have the idea that their pills come in the form of information. And I
So,
know of many times and places where psychiatrists have to rely upon the psychologist to get a good diagnosis, and then the psychologist resent that the psychiatrists are the pill pushers and they can't push pills and make money off of it.
well, I mean,
I've been deep enough into that profession to know all the tricks and, and things.
yeah, I actually have some thoughts on this too, to be honest. And I thought I'd bring this up. I have ADHD and I'm medicated for it. I'm actually on a few I'm on two medications right now, an SSNRI and dexamphetamine. So I was wondering where that sort of comes into it, because in terms of like just taking them, yeah,
Okay,
they
let
do.
me give let me
Yep.
give you this quick answer right now.
Hmm.
And that is that as you progress, which means as you understand the way that the mind works more and more, you will begin to see directly what effects these chemicals are having on you. And by doing that and by having self knowledge, you'll be able to answer that question yourself.
Okay.
You will never get a recommendation on that kind of regard from me as to keep taking your medicine and or stop it.
Right.
That's completely up to you. All
Okay.
right.
That's good. Thanks, Dhammarato.
All right. But as you progress, you will gain more and more knowledge. Now, one of the things that we can point out is that most of the medicines that people take now have all been invented since the 1960s when they first started with Thorazine, Haldol, Novocaine. Now they have things with Depakote and all of that kind of stuff, and none of those medicines have ever helped or cured anyone who has ever taken those medicines.
Yeah, I can definitely say that in my own thing. So I did notice. So there is an effect, of course, and I did notice on upon taking, like when I got on both these medications, I found that, yeah, my sort of, I guess the baseline state had been raised day to day, but it still took me doing a lot of conscious working in a mundane way, because I'm talking sort of in research terms. I had to learn study schedules. Like, they merely raised the base level. It still became about the application of my mind and the skillful skillful planning, and thinking about thinking and stuff, to be able to actually utilize that state at all.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise, it sort of raised me up, but I'm like, it's still not actually fixing anything.
Well, the history of the profession and the history of the medications, etc. And when I'm talking about that, I'll have to include the old stuff like Ritalin and also the
Mm-hmm.
lithium-based drugs.
Yeah.
That basically those medications were for the caretakers, not the client who took the drugs.
Interesting.
Teachers, parents, rest home operators, old folks home operators, psychiatric institute operators, even psychiatrists who were working with people that were not residential. In all cases, these medications are provided and prescribed for the benefit and the welfare of the caretakers, not the individual.
So when you say that, are you you saying it's sort of like, okay, let's say, for example, you and I come in, you're my psychiatrist, you're going to prescribe things that make it easier for you to make me realize the problems I'm having?
No,
Okay, then.
no. My giving you medicines is based upon a diagnostic category, and those diagnostic categories were invented in order to make the profession legitimate.
Right.
Because the diagnostic categories that psychiatrists and psychologists use, those diagnostic categories are mirrored from the medical diagnostic categories, with the following difference. And that is that the diagnostic categories of medicine were always determinable. In other words,
Yes.
you had something that you could see, you had something you could test for. The psychiatrists have nothing. It's
Yeah.
all mental.
See, that's
Go ahead.
sorry, my research supervisor actually talks about this, how psychology is bad science because it violates the first law of measurement, where the instrument must be separate from the object that you're measuring. However, by giving in research psychology, by giving a questionnaire, I'm measuring my mind state, but I'm also getting the way that the researcher gets my mind state is through me. Bad science in that sense.
Yes. Also, the phrase is the observer always bastardizes his own data.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? That's true in all respects. I'll give you the example of bird watching.
Mm-hmm.
If there is no bird watcher with telescope or with a camera out in the woods, the birds behave differently. But when that bird watcher comes in, the whole bird population know he's there, and they begin to behave differently because they know he's there.
There's a
Now, if
need
that
for the
happens
environment.
between birds and bird watchers, you can imagine that it also happens with psychologists, psychiatrists, and their objects.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, people are going to have different thoughts or different behaviors when they're taking the test than they would have if they hadn't been taking the test.
Mm.
What I
The
really just
sterile.
said is that all, not just humans, but all species of animals are liars.
Interesting.
And we lie according to our skill level.
Would that be a sort of like success? That's where you see successful people. They're the better liars.
You could take it back down to instincts,
Okay then.
all the way down to the instinctual level that we that we lie instinctually. Why? Because fear is a feeling that comes out of instinct. And so, if we are afraid, we are trying to hide.
Okay.
Okay, so there's that connection. That's where the lying comes from. It comes from the feelings of fear. So if you have absolutely no fear left, if you're completely fearless, then you have absolutely no reason to lie. You'll stop lying if you're fearless.
Right.
That's liberating. That's a
Okay.
liberating Dhamma. That's why the Buddha recommends to become fearless. That's why he sent his monks into the charnel ground. That's why he would send them, and he went too, into spooky places. So if you find a house in Perth that is known to be haunted, move in.
I did. There was a. It's funny. There was a haunted house. A haunted house in right near my high school growing up, and I remember some of my friends went in, and there was like a big pentagram on the wall or something. You know, maybe I should visit it sometime for practice.
Okay. So I'll give you another point in that regard. What I just told you is common knowledge throughout the world.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, one of the easier ways of controlling people is by making them afraid.
Right. Fear
Hence,
is the
you have
mind killer.
politics, and that's the birth of politics.
Right.
And how that works is if you tell your constituency how good you are, they won't vote. But if you tell them how bad your opponent is, they will.
Ah, okay. That's why you get into the whole hysterical finger pointing match during an election cycle.
Mm-hmm. Is because you motivate people through fear to vote. Another motivation would be anger.
Yep.
But fear is the primary motivator. And so in the United States right now, coming up to the midterm election, you have a whole group of people who are afraid and a whole bunch of a much larger group of people who are really angry. But the original constituency of Republicans, the Republicans have managed their party and their politics on fear forever, to where the Democrats want to promise you, if you do this, then you'll get that.
Mm.
Like social welfare programs, health insurance, that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And the Republicans then say, you don't want those black people to have your money, do you?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I've noticed that dynamic actually. It's sort of like the left will argue in terms of gains, and then the right will argue in terms of losses. And apparently, my supervisor was just telling me this the other day. Behavioral economics is this idea that you sort of you perceive losses and gains relative. So like if I went out gambling, lost
mm-hmm.
5 grand, I would easily throw away another $1,000 because I've already lost that 5 grand, and it's a relative loss. So I'm like, oh, it's not that much money. But then if I go out gambling and I lost $100, losing another $100 would be like, oh man, I've just lost double my money.
Yes, exactly so. This is also how the stock market works.
Yeah.
As that people, once they buy a stock, they own it, and therefore they identify with it.
Mm-hmm.
And when the stock goes up, they feel good, and when the stock goes down, they feel bad. But they're not wise enough when it goes down to follow the market correctly and sell it when it's time to sell.
Right.
So most people, because they identify with the ownership of their stock, they lose money on the stock market. It winds up being a fraudulent system.
Right.
Because
Is
there
that
are, go ahead.
sorry? Is that because would that be why Wall Street is so celebrated in movies? Like, it's sort of you've got lots of movies where it's sort of glamorized and it's perceived as ritzy and very hi-fi. Would that be sort of a thing behind that?
Well, big Hollywood movies take big money.
Right.
And sometimes their big money comes from Wall Street.
Okay.
There's your connection right there. Now,
Yep.
one of the things that you'll see in modern society is that the highest good is greed.
Mm-hmm.
But that's been the case forever,
Mm-hmm.
or at least as far back as we know about civilization. So the highest greed is the highest good.
Right.
And we look at people by how much money they have. But
Mm-hmm.
really, if you want to know the scum of the earth are the inheritors of wealth.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the way that they behave, and I can give you dozens and dozens of examples, but inherited wealth is a curse, not a blessing.
Mm-hmm.
And that normally it happens in stages in various ways. One of them is the relationship to the dad, who is so greedy that he will do anything to get money, never mind his kids, until he's older and he's got the money, and now the kids are older and they want the money, and now the relationship changes because now it's adults, but the old hatred for the dad remains.
Mm-hmm. Festering.
Because very wealthy dads are seldom good fathers.
Right.
They're almost always 100% of the time assholes. Okay? Why is that? Because they're in the habit of being an asshole, and they've been in the habit of being an asshole. That's why they got rich. Whereas good people do not become rich. An example of that would be if you had a good product to sell, you may become well off.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to cheat your way with that product in order to get really wealthy with it.
Right.
You have to buy a politician or two. You have to tell a lie or two, etc., like that.
Mm-hmm.
There's also the idea of a windfall or just showing up.
Mm-hmm.
And that happens. In fact, Woody Allen, and we know his history, says that 80% of success is just showing up.
Yeah, I've heard that quote before.
Okay, so if you show up on a cotton plantation, your success is going to be in a handful of cotton. If you show up on Wall Street, then you're more than likely going to hand a handful of treasury notes or bills or something like that. So there's just the amount, or just the issue of showing up. There's a certain amount of wealth. But to make wealth, real wealth, you have to cheat, lie, steal, rob, not pay your bills, and in fact become a Donald Trump.
Right.
And you can see that Donald Trump also, he claims that he's a self-made man, but in fact he's nothing but an heir.
Mm.
Another example, by the way, on that regard is Onassis, the daughter of Onassis. Do you might not know enough about politics. This goes back a ways, but I'll explain it. Jacqueline Kennedy, after John Fitzgerald Kennedy was killed, she married a shipping magnate named Onassis. Onassis had his own daughter from a previous marriage. That daughter was the inheritor of Onassis shipping. They were Greek, and he had much of the shipping in the Mediterranean. After he died, or when he died, he put all of his wealth into a trust fund. And that daughter, I forget what her name was, could not trust any of the trust fund managers. And so she began to undermine them. And in the process, she destroyed her father's company. She wound up killing herself, suicide. In fact, there's a huge number of really, really successful, wealthy people who kill themselves, either intentionally or accidentally through drugs or whatever, with the thought on their mind of, is this all there is? In other words, their greed goes to a point that they could say, well, now that I'm successful because I've got more money than anybody that I ever knew, why am I not happy? In fact, I'm miserable.
Yeah.
Judy Garland, do you know Judy Garland? She's the girl who did The Wizard of Oz, the most famous movie. Okay.
Right.
And she committed suicide.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
She would come off the stage with questions like, how was I? Did I do good? In other words, she was always insecure inside, just like Donald Trump. Donald Trump asked the same questions that Judy Garland would ask. Now, that leads into a secret. The secret is that when people tell a deliberate lie, they will try to get you to agree with them. In other words, they want agreement. There's two reasons for that. One is they want you to believe the lie, but more importantly, they want you to connect with them as they are, a liar.
Right.
They still want acceptance. And so let me give you a few gestures that liars will give. Did you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, the raising of the eyebrows, the shaking of the head, the pleading kind of expression. Do you believe me?
Right.
Okay, so I can see when Donald Trump is telling a lie, he'll do something like that. He'll look over at somebody in the audience to see, do you actually believe this crap I'm telling you? Okay, so that's one. Now, if you are trained as an interrogator like a policeman, then what they do is that they put people under pressure. Intentional. Do you know NLP? Have you ever heard of neuro-linguistic programming?
Is that the thing where you like map states to like gestures? So like that would be relaxation, that would be calm or
That I
some.
that I don't know.
Okay, I'm not aware then.
Okay, neuro-linguistic programming by Bandler and Grinder. They had um, a major teacher that they had called Milton H. Erickson, who was a master hypnotist.
Right.
And so a lot of this stuff that they come out with, and by the way, when I was studying this, I was studying it along with, in fact, I actually had classes with Bandler and Grinder. They would come in and we'd pay them a lot of money and they would tell us all their techniques and stuff like that, along with the tops of the transactional analysis, which is also very transaction oriented, the way that people speak and talk together and play games and all of that kind of stuff, so that psychologists can learn about people. This is the diagnostic part. So in NLP, because they have such a close connection to hypnosis through their teacher, Milton H. Erickson, they show and teach their own students how to use these techniques consciously that we use with each other unconsciously all the time.
Right.
So that if you're a cop and know these things, then you'll know how to very, very surreptitiously put the person you're interrogating under pressure.
Right.
Put them in stress. Why?
Right.
Because you can get them into stress and then question them and cross-question them from serious directions. Any lies that they're telling will become really obvious.
Okay.
To where TA is going to look much closer at facial gestures, etc., like that. Okay, so one is an examination and the other one is just observation. But in both cases, you can begin to tell a lie simply because the liar wants you to believe them.
Right.
So now that you know that, you can also see, wait a minute, maybe other people know that. Maybe I should shut my mouth and stop my own lies. because that's what's the value of this kind of information is for each individual who knows these things can put them in place and use them as a skill for the cleaning out of their own mind so that they can become free from suffering themselves.
Right.
Okay, this is something to become on guard for. And that, so let me give you this point, is that Ajahn Brahm has, I would not say that he's teaching wrongly or even out of order. There is a place for the jhanas, but the first jhana is where the work is going to be done.
Right.
And the reason for that is because in the first jhana, you have the ability to have applied and sustained thought.
Right.
And
that
that
goes
applied,
away.
pardon?
That goes away further down the progression of the jhanas, doesn't it?
Well, the ordinary mind is filled with hindrances.
Yeah.
The student has, his mind is filled with hindrances, but he knows it. The next step is that the mind is filled with hindrance and the student develops the skill of throwing those hindrances out. And now he knows he can throw them out. Once the next step then is to be able to keep the hindrances out so that we can keep the mind focused on something important.
Okay.
All right. But it's not going to be the kind of focus that is too tight.
Right.
All right. We actually need to have our verbal skills. We do not want to close off the verbal skill part of the mind, which is what we do in second jhana. And in fact, second jhana is the first place where the Buddha talks about concentration.
Right.
This whole idea about access concentration is wrongly labeled.
Okay.
Because there is no concentration in access concentration, only access.
Right. So you can only get into the jhanas with it. There's no
but
actual
even when you go into the jhana, you're still not in concentration.
Right.
It's only in the higher jhanas you have concentration, so a pre-jhana state should not be called access concentration.
Right.
All right. What that means is that the people who developed that term access concentration, whatever it was in their language, and then translated as that into English, were in the Buddhist religion, not in the Noble Dhamma. Noble Dhamma does not have a concept of access concentration.
Right.
We have the concept of making the mind fit for work.
Okay.
All right. And so the first jhana is applied and sustained thought, which means now we can apply the mind to something that's worth applying it to and keeping the mind focused on that and not let the mind drift away. Because the very quality of the mind drifting away is going back into hindrances,
Right. Okay.
going back into dream states, going back into past, future, agitation, worry, doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that when we can get the mind free from those kind of things, then the mind is fit for work.
Okay.
All right, now I'll go into great detail of what the mind is that's fit for work, what it should be worthy of paying attention to, but I'll give you the example of that. It's the Four Noble Truths.
Right.
So once we get the mind into first jhana, we start paying attention to what is suffering, how is suffering created, what are the processes of the mind that creates this suffering, which, by the way, is called paticca samuppada or paticca samuppada in Thai, or dependent origination in English. And what that means is that it's a sequence of events, a step-by-step sequence of events. Now, what that sequence of events it means, cause, effect, cause, effect, cause, effect, cause, effect. So this cause is this, which is an effect, but that causes the next thing when that becomes an effect. And so then that becomes a cause for something else, a chain reaction, just like dominoes. You've seen all of these domino things, okay, and you kick that first one. It causes the second one to fall, but the falling of the second one now becomes the cause for the third one to fall.
Right.
Okay, dependent origination, or the way that the mind works, does exactly that. And when it's done ignorantly, it winds up in suffering. And when there is a point of wisdom that comes in, it does not lead to suffering. Okay. So really understanding that second noble truth of how the mind works, what is the actual cause of suffering, is an extraordinarily important part, and is possibly the longest time duration of the practice, is really figuring out exactly how the mind works. By doing that, something magical happens, and I'm using the word magical in a ridiculous way here, because in fact that's possibly the major distinction between the Buddhist religion that we mentioned and the Noble Dhamma of the Buddha.
Right.
Is that the Buddha's method has no magic in it. The Buddhist religion is full of magic.
Right.
All right. There is no magic. So when I say something magical happens, I'm saying that ironically.
Right. Yes.
Okay. What is it that magically happens when we figure out how the mind works? Then we recognize that there is no self in there that's making it work.
Right. It's just a process.
Okay. And in fact, it's just a process. And in the realization of that, that's the giving up of the magic. Mm-hmm. And so the magic that happens is the student gives up magic.
Right.
He gives up magical beliefs.
Right.
Because he has that ability to see the way the mind itself is working. That also takes on personal responsibility. In fact, personal responsibility is there right from the get-go in the following ways. When the student gets to the point that he recognizes that he actually can, no matter how the mind is obstructed, he can clean that out. Mm-hmm. By doing so, he's taking responsibility right then. Oh, my suffering is not because of Aunt Susie. My suffering is not because of a tsunami. My suffering is not because of a government regulation that I don't like. It's my not liking that government regulation that causes the suffering.
Right. My reaction to the
My
stimuli.
reaction to it, right? So we begin to see that there is no place for victim.
Right.
We cannot be a victim anymore. All
Right.
right. Now the interesting thing is that are you familiar? Ever heard of Eric Berne?
No, I haven't. Sorry.
All right, Eric Berne died 1972, so he's probably not on your to-do list. But he had two very famous books on the top number one bestseller. The first one was I'm Okay, You're Okay. And the second one was named Games People Play.
Mhm.
That second book, Games People Play, is very, very transactional. And we'll talk about that from time to time. But the first book, I'm Okay, You're Okay, is where he sets up the OK Corral, or the place where we take on existential life positions. Though from time to time we change those positions, like when we're in a pecking order. All right. So at one point in the pecking order, we're at one place, and on the later in the pecking order, we become something else. So there is some movement around this OK Corral. So let me describe what it is. It has to do with our own internal idea of ourselves. Are we okay or not?
Right. Our
And
reaction.
then the on the other side is the world on the outside, everything that's not me. Is it okay or not? Now the victim's position is I'm not okay, but the world is. I need help.
Right.
I have been persecuted and I need a savior. I need a helper. I need a religion. I need a Buddha. I need a Jesus. I need something. All
Right.
right. It's a loser's position. Every single human being is born as a victim.
Right.
It's not possible to be born as a lion. We are, as children, under the thumb of our inability to behave, our inability to know, our inability to feed ourselves, our inability to do anything
Right.
without our parents' help. We start out at victimhood.
Mhm.
Sometime along the way, though, people gain skills. The skill that they don't gain is to come out of that victimhood. Now,
Okay.
that victimhood goes actually deeper than what I even mentioned. It goes right down into our genes.
Mhm.
We are herd animals. We are mammals. Okay, we do not have a mommy that laid an egg and then left us,
Mhm.
the way that it happens with snakes, crocodiles, fish, etc. Okay, that when we were laid as an egg, we had taken care of. And sometimes, in fact, nowadays it looks like it takes about 25 years of caring for that egg, and you still never get an adult. All you have is victim. A 40-year-old victim is going through a life crisis, saying, I'm still a victim. Maybe if I buy a car that's a really whiz-bang car, what they call a chick magnet, then maybe I'll be okay. Okay, so now they're making a material item
Mhm.
their savior. Well, big business makes their big business a big business by telling you that lie. If you buy
Right.
what we sell, you'll be better off, Mr.
Right.
Victim.
You'll be okay.
You'll be okay if you get what we have. You need a new cell phone, a cheaper car, an electric car. You need something, all right? And so everybody buys into that because we start out as victims. How can we move our mental state out of being victim by not only a very, very old, deep, bad habit, but it's also right down to our genes? And yet you've probably known enough about Buddhism and the Buddha that you've heard that Buddha was referred to as a lion,
Yeah. The lion's
not
voice.
a victim. He's definitely up there in I'm okay category. So that means that if you're going to follow the path of the Buddha, it's going to lead you out of I'm not okay into I'm okay.
Right.
That's a
Okay.
major, major change. Okay. And where it starts is in meditation when the student recognizes that his mind has wandered away from the breath. He, in fact, can come back to the breath and
Okay.
not be victimized by his inability to watch the breath.
Interesting.
Yes, interesting, isn't it?
because that was actually when you mention it, it was that was a period. There was a period in my practice where I really struggled with a. Do you know the Mind Illuminated?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so
Wait a minute.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah, you're bang on, Chula Dasa. I was working with that book and didn't have a teacher at the time. Completely self-studied, and I didn't realize that I was buying into the victim story when I got distracted from the breath. Felt a lot of frustration doing it. I eventually started reading Than Bhikku's books, and that style gelled with me a bit more, and I got past that. And when I could actually just come back to the breath, like, all right, yep, it's gone away, back, gone away, back, then meditation became a lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot easier.
Right. Well, what makes it hard is not that the mind wanders away from the breath. Rather, it's the ignorance that keeps the mind wandering away from the breath, and it never comes back. They've just forgotten. In fact, in that regard, there's no sati.
Right.
No sati at all. And the way that I use the word is, though I will use the word mindfulness, that's just a bad habit.
Mm-hmm.
The actual definition of the word sati is to remember.
Okay.
Okay. That if you want to use mindfulness, that's got a different quality to it. But if you add the two terms of mindfulness and investigation,
right,
then you'll have, or let us, excuse me, if you have to remember and to investigate, those two things can be called mindfulness, and I'll let the word mindfulness come about. Okay. Why? Because mindfulness also has the quality of being careful or watching what you're doing, investigating the situation, to where sati alone, if there's nothing, if there's no wisdom or no investigation there at all, then that will come, then that other thing will come up of, oh no, this is hard. Oh no, I don't like my mind wandering away. I would rather just sit here. And this, in fact, I know that this happens on a regular, possibly a universal basis for beginning students. That's doing their retreat. So it's the first retreat, and they're like 6 days into it, and they have the thought, I would rather just sit here and get the benefits of doing the retreat and doing the meditation than actually doing the work of it. And besides, I like just watching my mind just wander all over the place. I'm having a lot of good new ideas.
Right.
All right. But they still say that this retreat is beneficial because they're putting in the hours. They may even have a cell phone application say, I last month I did this many hours of meditation, and the month before I did this many, and now I'm doing more hours of meditation. But while I'm sitting, I'm not doing. So it would be very much like the piano student that sits in front of the piano looking at a cartoon on his cell phone for 30 minutes and then claim 30 minutes of piano practice.
It's just not setting it up right.
Right. That's what most meditators do in the beginning. That's the starter's meditation. Is that it is too painful to figure out that my mind is in fact not as nearly as good as I thought it was. I thought that I could just watch my breath. I mean, that's such a simple thing. And I don't like the fact that I can't watch my breath. All right. Now, when I say I don't like it that I can't watch my breath, that's victim.
Right.
If you're going to be from I'm okay position, then the right way to do it with Goenka. Goenka's word for that is never mind, start again.
Right.
Never mind, start again. The never mind is to throw out the victim.
Okay.
And to come back and start again. Mm-hmm. To throw the victim out. All right. And become a winner right from this breath. As I start breathing again, I'm taking control over my life. When the mind had wandered away, I was no longer in control. The wandering mind that is unskilled and untrained was in control. Another way of looking at that is that the human brain evolved over time, over many centuries, and so things were added. But there is a part of the brain.
So could I just interrupt for a second. I need to put my laptop on charge or else I'll cut out. I'll be 2 seconds, sorry. Sorry, my apologies.
If this is a skillful technique that is picked up, the Buddha says that there comes a stage when the student recognizes that no matter how obstructed the mind is with hindrances, that the mind can in fact be cleaned out. And that I can see things as they truly are. Now, this is not yet first jhana, but it is a remarkable change. It's so remarkable because that's the change when instead of being a victim of our meditation, we become the manager of our meditation. So that no matter how obstructed the mind is, I know that I can clean it out. And when I mean clean it out, I'll talk about that in a second. I can clean it out enough to where I can be here now. I can see the way things are right now. I can be here now. All right. So what I mean by cleaning out is that whatever thoughts that were there, we need to do two things for them. We need to note them or recognize them for what they were, because that's how we're going to start putting dots down so that we later can connect the dots. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we note what the mind was thinking about when we recognize that the mind was wandering off, but then the more important thing is to stop it, to throw it out. To stop thinking about that and start thinking about something that's worthwhile thinking about. Even for the short term, because this is just a beginner's mind, but the beginner's mind at this point is a major change, a major transformation. Because most people do not, either they think that they can control their mind without ever checking it out to find out if they can, which is the very lowest state, mm-hmm. or that they start checking their mind out and find out that they in fact can't control it. That's still a higher state, but it's an ordinary state. It's the beginning, the state of I don't know, I'm not sure. Okay, so the next step is, yes, I can. Yes, I can clean out the mind. All right, so here's an example. If you have a song stuck in the mind, and it plays over and over and over incessantly, there's an easy way to get that song out of the mind. What is that? By having another song. Put another song in the mind. And when you get that song established, then you throw both of them out.
Oh, okay.
Now, if that old song comes back or the second song comes back, then you add a third song in the mix. You play that for a while, and then you throw that one out too. And come back and start studying the breath. And by studying the breath, we will study the body. So in Anapanasati Sutta, you have I understand that I'm breathing in long, and I understand that I'm breathing out long. And then we understand that we're breathing in short, and understanding that we're breathing in short. Now, in fact, two different parts of the brain are going to be used for these two different kinds of breathing.
Right.
All right. The old reptilian brain, the part of the what's called anterior cortex, that regulates heartbeat. And it also regulates breathing. It also is close to the pituitary and the pineal glands, and that is connected to the base stem. So that means that the reptilian brain senses all of the senses of the skin touch, scratches, itches, cuts, etc., like that, come up through the brainstem into the reptilian brain. All right. Then you have other things, but over the development cycle, there were aspects added that can be called the mammalian brain
Mm-hmm.
that is more detailed. And then you have the frontal cortex, which only humans have.
Right.
Now, surprisingly enough, when you start watching your breath consciously, the frontal cortex lights up. This has been done with functional MARs and
Okay.
meditations and all of that. What that means is, basically, Tunisro has a book called Mind Like Fire Unbound. Do you know that book?
I'm
Have you
not
heard that
familiar with that
title?
one. No.
Okay. The point is that we need to set the mind on fire.
Right. Okay.
All right. And that the best way to do this in the beginning is with the conscious breath. By breathing consciously, we begin to light up the frontal lobe. We become human. When we let the breathing go back to normal, we're breathing with reptilian brain.
Right.
All right. Different part of the brain that's in operation. Now, watch me very, very closely. Watch what I do.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see what I did?
You scratched your head and then turned your head to the stretch.
Excellent. Right. Now, most people do those kind of scratches ignorantly,
Right.
which means that the sensation comes up the brainstem into the reptilian brain. The feelings arise of I don't like it,
Mm-hmm.
all
So you
inside the
scratch.
reptilian brain. And so then the reptilian brain will, in fact, order the hand to come and do the movement of the scratching. And if the frontal cortex is reading a book or having a conversation or driving a car or doing other things like that, the frontal cortex doesn't even know that that whole procedure happened. In fact,
Okay.
I can do it with students, and they'll make a gesture, and I'll point it out, and they realize only in retrospect that I saw it
Ah.
while it was happening, but the students, they don't see it because
Right.
they were listening to me and they start scratching. Okay, so that's ignorance.
Right.
That's why we begin to start watching the body. So
Mm-hmm.
step 3 of Anapanasati is start to watch what the body is doing. Become closely aligned to that body. But in the process, step 1 means a long, slow, conscious breath.
Right.
We're
So
actually controlling the breath when we're doing
okay.
the long breath.
Right.
We're focusing on the body. One of the best places to focus is on the chest in the beginning, but we want to be able to know the body all over.
Right.
This is the joy of the Goenka technique when they do the body scanning. This is step 3 of Anapanasati.
Okay.
Okay, there is, by the way that I teach, there is no distinction between some kind of meditation or another and Vipassana. It
Right.
is all Vipassana.
Okay.
Okay, 100%. Even jhanas, when they're done right, is Vipassana.
Okay.
Mostly when jhanas are done, they're so hard to do, they're done without Vipassana.
Just
So it's
slip into.
better. So it's better to get your Vipassana skills developed before you do jhana.
Right. Okay.
Okay, but the Buddha says it doesn't matter.
Right.
In the sense that if you have Vipassana but you don't have Samatha, then you do Samatha after you do uh, insight.
Mm-hmm.
If you have Samatha but you don't have insight or Vipassana, then you should stop doing this and practice this. Why? Because if you try to put them together in a certain way, they're much more difficult to do.
Right.
But if you have neither one, then they can be done in connection or combination, but always led by Vipassana.
Right.
Uh,
Okay.
okay. So in that regard, the danger is doing jhanas too soon.
Right.
If we really want to do the real work before we
Right.
do the jhana, so that when we do the jhana, we know what we're doing rather than just enjoying a state that we don't know that much about.
I see. I think I actually had that with when I was practicing solo with Thanissaro Bhikkhu's work. I would get into these very pleasurable states, and sometimes I would glide into them, sometimes I wouldn't, sometimes they wouldn't happen at all. And it was really lovely, but I guess I didn't really start to understand my mind until I started trying to perform Vipassana style meditation. And that's when my practice took off a lot. So in terms of if I was to write down the detailed instructions, it'd be labeling the breath.
Be careful of labeling.
Okay, all right then.
The word label and note are far too strong for what actually needs to be done, especially with the word noting, because the way that the Mahasa system is taught, a lot of the students think that they need to actually verbalize. In other words, rising, falling, touching, sitting. The way we actually want to practice is by note, but noting things without really touching them or grabbing a hold of them or spending any time on them, because we have the understanding that there's a lot to be noted. And if I spend too much time noting something, I'm going to miss something else.
Okay.
That's exactly what happens in the higher jhanas. That we get, for instance, we begin to pay close attention to effects, but we missed how the causes happened. In first jhana, we can go cause and effect and follow the sequence.
Okay.
And so actually in Sutta number 36, which is the sutta where the Buddha talks about him falling in the creek and coming out of the creek, recognizing that he, by fasting and doing the austerities and things, that he was not going to get enlightened. He could barely stand up and walk. And that's when he decided to take nourishing food. But that was also the point in time of the realization that it is first jhana that is the path to enlightenment. And he tells the story of the rose apple tree, which I think that you've heard about.
Yeah.
But very, very few people read to the end of it to recognize that the Buddha is saying the real path of the Buddha Dhamma is the first jhana, not the higher jhanas.
Right.
That in fact the higher jhanas are something that the first jhana dude who has become noble can use to structure his time.
Right.
He's still going to have 24 hours a day, so why don't you do something pleasing and pleasurable?
Okay then.
All right, so it's higher jhanas are good for time structuring once you figure out what needs to be figured out. Until that time, when we're still needing to figure stuff out, first jhana is the place to do it. And the reason for that is because that's this place where the mind is free from hindrances and it is fit for work. You can apply the mind on a topic and you can keep focused on that topic.
Right.
Okay, that's the first jhana. And the topic that we're going to focus on is the Four Noble Truths.
Right.
Now, normally in the Buddhist religion, the Four Noble Truths is one of the very first things that the students are taught.
Right view.
Okay. In the Noble Dhamma, the Four Noble Truths is your PhD thesis.
Okay then.
All right. It's not beginner's work. It's the it. It's the whole thing. And we have to know all of it. So we have to see dukkha on the inside, see it on the outside. In fact, that's one of the most important things for students to begin to notice. And this comes out of the Satipatthana Sutta, close to the end of it, Sutra number 10, is to know what's internal and what's external.
Okay.
Now, normally what happens is that people think that everything that's in the mind is internal and everything that's not in the mind on the outside must be external. What we begin to figure out is, oh no, there's a lot of stuff in there that don't belong. There's a lot of crap in here that's actually external that I brought in, trying to own it, make it mine, where in fact it's not mine at all. It belongs on the outside.
Right. Okay.
Okay, and one of those is the victim's position. The victim's position is something that you see on the outside world. And we're going to drop the victim's position and become the winner, the lion, the tough dude. Okay, and in fact, in one case, the Buddha talks about it in the sense of unification of mind.
Right.
Unification of mind with its supports and requisites. Now, hear me carefully. Unification of mind with its supports and requisites is right noble concentration, not jhana concentration. Only to the point of having a unified mind with its supports and requisites. What are the supports and requisites? Starting with right view, right intention, right sati, right effort. And in fact, effort is the important one, because most students put they either put not enough effort in or too much of the wrong kind of effort.
Right.
And in fact, that's so common that even translators will translate some Pali words into the word striving.
Right.
Striving is just stressful.
Yeah.
Don't strive. Enjoy your practice.
Right.
A much better word would be persistence.
Okay.
All right? Not striving, but persistence.
So instead of doggedly pursuing my goals, I just persist in the face of failures or whatever.
No, failures are judgments.
Right. Okay.
One of the things we might want to do is start to enjoy the fact that we're not judging things as failures.
Oh, I didn't even think of that.
Think of it as development.
Okay.
Because, in fact, to be able to see a failure, that's new wisdom, beginning wisdom, but new wisdom, because before that, you could not see it as a failure at all. You could not even see what it was, never mind judging it as a failure. And I'm talking about deep things like, in the beginning, never mind, start again, because the mind has wandered away. Most people in the beginning, they don't even know that the mind is like that it wanders away because it's untrained. Okay? So basically, it's kind of like this. Imagine that your intention is to train a young dog, not a baby puppy, but 3 to 6 months, something like that. And that your intention of training this puppy or this dog is to come when it's called.
Right.
If you lock that dog into a cage, and the cage is on the other side of the yard, will that dog come when it's called?
I don't think so.
No. So in that regard, jhana is not where you want to keep your dog.
Right.
You want to give the dog freedom to roam, but he's going to come back Johnny on the spot when you call him.
Right.
Okay. That's the way that we want to look at your practice is that the mind comes when it's called.
Right.
To be able to do that, that's a skill.
Okay.
And that's where the right effort is. So right effort is to obey, and we'll go into this in great detail later. But right now I'll tell you that right effort, the noble right effort as part of the Eightfold Noble Path, one's right effort is to maintain or to actually, let me say it the way this way, is to see wrong view as wrong view and right view as right view, and then come to right view.
Okay.
All right. Now, how we apply that to the very beginning is wrong view is, oh, this is hard. Oh, my mind is a monkey mind. In fact, you probably heard that word, monkey mind, monkey mind.
Many times.
Okay. So that's wrong view.
Mm-hmm.
Monkey mind is wrong view. It's not a monkey mind. It's a human mind that's just untrained yet. Never mind, start again. Coming out of the wrong view of monkey mind into the right view of never mind, let's start again. Okay. Yes. So that's one's right effort, but that same right effort is going to be there for every little thing that happens. Somebody says a bad word to you and your normal way is to get angry, but now you're going to say, never mind, I'm not going to go down that path. I'm going to go down the path of right view instead. So that's the effort that we take, and it's going to be an effort. because we have a lot of, let us say, DNA programming and a lot of habitual pathways that we have to get over. And so that's what's going to take some effort.
Okay.
The effort is to come out of wrong view and to come into right view and maintain right view, and that sometimes is really, really hard. Okay. Especially if you don't have a teacher or somebody over your shoulder to point it out. and that's going to be only a rare occasion that you've got a teacher that can point things out to you. So that's one's right effort, and that's going to happen whether you're sitting there in meditation for the first time, whether you're an old Jhana dude, or whether you're a regular person who's done some meditation and out in the world. It's always the same thing. And that is to have the right effort to come out of wrong view into right view, which means basically, if you can think about it like this, is stop letting the reptilian brain manage your feelings and start feeling the way you want to feel. And in fact, what I just said is the job of the Sotapan. Right. Because in fact, the first 3 fetters is to become Sotapan once you are full, and I'll teach you all about that, but after one is fully Sotapan, he now has all the knowledge and all the skills to really start to managing his feelings. So we know that the Sotapan is the first 3 fetters, which is personality view comes first. You have to recognize that you are not going to be reborn, that you are not who you thought you were, that you're nothing but a human process, and it's an unskilled process at that, leading generally and far too often into suffering. That's the first one. The second one is to understand basically what is not the path. And then the third one is knowledge and vision of what is the path. Now that can be said is that what is not the path is doing what you were told to do.
Right.
No matter who it was that told you to do it. Doing what you're told to do is not liberating 100% of the time.
Wow. Okay. Interesting.
All right. Now here's how that works at the very beginning. At the very beginning, for most students, they believe, like Christians, for instance, or Hindus, reincarnation, or that they believe in a soul. In fact, the Hindus have taken up that word soul very, very well. It was already in their language, so they didn't need much help. Winding up with language that has names like Mahatma. Okay? Mahatma Gandhi is great soul. Maha-Atma. Okay, Atma, and yet the Buddha teaches anatta. There is no soul. Now, the way that the Christians and the way that the Hindus operate as if there was a law of karma, and they use it like that, the law of karma. Christians have that same thing too, except that they use it in the expression of you have to do what God wants. Okay, so God makes good and bad, etc. All right, now here's the point. With Christianity, we'll use that. Once you die, your soul then becomes a football for God. He can do with it anything he wants.
Yeah.
He can put you in the choir. He can put you in the back of the audience. He can throw you into hell. He can do anything he wants to if you've got a soul. If you have no soul, then God has no effect upon you and you are free. So long as there's a soul, you're under the thumb of a God. If there is no soul, then you are free from a God. Therefore, all gods are irrelevant.
Right.
The Buddha does not talk about are there gods or not. In fact, he says, I know there are gods. And when you question about that, he says, I know there are gods because they are in wide belief. What he's actually pointing at, that gods do exist, but they exist in the minds of those people out there who believe in the God. That's where the God exists. But guess what? He actually really does exist. And he controls their lives. Even though he doesn't actually exist, they get the rules that God wants you to follow from somebody else who made them up.
Right. Okay.
and he wants your money.
Church choir donations.
Exactly. Churches require donations. And so do the Buddhist religion. But the supramundane Dhamma, the liberating Dhamma, is given always free of charge. Now, the psychologists will say, hold on. If you give our teachings free of charge, then that makes it worthless because you didn't charge any money for it.
Right.
But something else is involved with that. If I give you the Dhamma free of charge, then I'm giving you a gift, and you see it as a gift, and that you operate it from this if it was a gift. If, in fact, I'm a psychologist and you pay by the hour, then that means it's a business relationship, and you're paying me to take your suffering away. In other words, by paying the psychologist, the client is already back in the victim's position.
Right.
Huh?
Oh, okay.
But if it's free, then you and I don't have to have that up-down relationship. We could just be friends.
Okay.
And the Buddha has a word for that too, called Kalya Metta. Just friends.
What's Kalyana? Is that's supposed to be like the noble friends or something?
That's exactly right. That's what my role is. I'm a noble friend.
Okay.
Kalya Metta. All right. And so that's the way that we should all operate between each other.
Right.
Those Buddhist monks who like and want to be called Achan, I know I've been there, done that. They want that Achan label because they don't feel good enough about themselves. They're not really lions yet, and so they'll try to take on the intermediate position of Achan, guru, big dude. All right, but if you don't need those labels, then we don't have to have any labels.
Right. Okay.
All right. That we can become, in fact, the whole teaching of the Buddha is to become the horn. Are you familiar with a book or a work called Sutta Nipata?
The name is ringing a bell, but I can't consciously bring it to mind.
The Sutta Nipata, along with several other works, are known to be the earliest things that were done.
Right.
That even the Majjhima Nikaya was put together after the Buddha died. That was done at the first council.
Okay.
The Samyutta Nikaya grew up over a long period of time, up until the time of Ashoka. The Dhinga Nikaya was done at the time of Ashoka for a particular reason.
Right.
But the point that I'm making is that the Udana and the Teragita, the Teragita, and the Sutta Nipata were all done during the time of the Buddha's life. Okay. That the Sri Lankans claim that all of the Buddha's works were not written down and collected until the 1st century. That's true, all of it. But there was quite a lot of stuff all along the way that was done.
Okay.
All right, and so the Sutta Nipata, and in fact we know because there are references from suttas that reference the Sutta Nipata by chapter and verse.
Okay.
So that means that in the time of the Buddha, the Sutta Nipata was already in existence as literature.
Right.
Not needing to be collected later together. All right.
Right.
And so this is a work that's really worthwhile spending time with. Okay. In the early part of the Sutta Nipata, there is one sutta that is called, the actual name of it is the horn. And what it means is that in India, the rhinoceros were different than the African, that the African rhinoceros has 2 horns.
Right.
Almost all the other animals have 2 horns, whether it's an elephant with teeth or whether it's a devil or whatever it is. They normally have 2 horns. But the Indian rhinoceros has a single horn, just 1 horn. And so the Horn Sutta is referring to the rhinoceros And that then the sutra talks about the way the rhinoceros lives his life is a solitary life. He's on his own. That you could almost see that the Buddha was talking about rhinoceros, and then he picked up the idea of a lion. But the idea of an individual becoming a single solitary individual, why? Because his mind is now unified. So long as our mind is divided, we'll be pulled this way and that way by society or the rules of society or by our own feelings.
Right.
But once we have a unified mind, the qualities of a unified mind are the following. One is we don't lie. Tell the truth. The truth becomes the most important thing that we want to know. Number two is that there's no fear and no doubt. This is an important one because so long as there is doubt, that still invites us, at least occasionally, back into victim's position.
Okay.
But the Buddha is free from doubt. The Arhat, free from doubt. The Sotapan, a full Sotapan, though he has not finished with all the fetters yet, he knows exactly what there is to do. He knows it's a position of knowledge. Right. So the Sotapan, a full Sotapan, is automatically 100% of the time in I'm okay position.
Okay.
Now, there's a little bit more on that we'll talk about, and that is on the other side is I'm okay, you're okay. So if I'm not okay and the world is okay, then I'm victim's position.
Right.
If I'm not okay and the world is not okay, then almost game over. These are the real losers. Try hard. Even though they're intellectually capable of living a life, they're emotionally not, and these are the people who wind up in institutions.
Right.
Okay. The next place is I'm okay, but you're not okay. All right. These are the people who wind up being politicians. They wind up being criminals. They wind up thinking that because I'm okay and the next one is I'm okay, but the world is not okay. And that's the world of teachers, doctors, also politicians, and corporate elites. Okay, so you can look at a corporate elite, a really rich man, and his position is I'm not okay, or I'm okay, but the world is not, and it needs fixing. Not only does it need fixing, but it needs my help.
Yeah, it's my fixing.
Yeah, my fixing. Exactly, my solution. Right. A profitable solution.
Yeah, a solution where I benefit, of course.
Exactly. In that regard, he's not 100% okay yet.
Yeah, exactly.
Because he needs the world in order to rob it.
And he needs to permeate the world to change it for his own purposes, to get something out of it.
Exactly so. So this position of I'm okay and the world is already okay, that's a very, very unusual and unique position to be in. That's the position of the Buddha. It's to where everything is all right. We stop operating by feelings. We start operating by wisdom. And the more wisdom we have, the more we recognize that it's not my job to judge the world. That if anything, it's only my job to enjoy the world as it is without trying to fix it.
Right. Okay.
So if you have that attitude, then you can look at politics and you can see what a marvelous joke it is. Right. But if you take either side, then you're going to be in suffering because they're up, down, up, down, up, down. And if you can enjoy watching those guys go up, down, then you can enjoy life. But if you get attached to that Democrat or that Republican or that conservative or that Labor Party or whatever like that, then the vagaries of that party are going to be your own vagaries, up and down, up and down, up and down. This is one of the reasons why we want to detach ourselves from identification with outside groups. Because when they suffer, we suffer. This is what the Buddha means by lowering the banner. You can also see how it is attached, or let us say closely aligned with the nesting instinct.
Yep.
Who am I going to allow into my nest?
Okay.
Okay. Who do I identify with?
Who comes into the pack?
Yeah. Who's in my pack? Exactly. Who's in my pack? He,
So
he also talks about filling in the trench in the sense of giving up the territorial instinct.
okay.
That I don't make distinction between this is mine and that over there is their place.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so you can see how the basic instincts are actually what the Buddha was working with, and we'll go more into that. I know you got a question. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was just wondering in terms of like structured practice and stuff. How do you prefer your students to practice? Do you have like a resource that you would like me to practice according to?
Well, the first thing is to define what practice is.
Right.
The second thing is to let us put it this way. From the very, very start, all the way through the full fruit of Sotapan is the development of a skill that we can call determination. And when I say determination, I mean things that we actually require of ourselves. But if we fail at that requirement, it's not a failure. It's just part of the process. In other words, if you fall down, never mind. You pick yourself up, you dust yourself off, and you start all over again. But it's not that we lay on the ground and scream in pain about that root that tripped us up.
Mm. Don't lament your circumstances.
Right. So we stand up and dust ourselves off, which means clean the mind out.
Mm-hmm.
Get the dust off of us and start all over again. All right. And we have the determination to do that. No matter how many times I fall down, I'm going to get up and I'm going to go. That determination is something that needs to be built up over time, and it will, in fact, become fully manifested as fruit of Sotapan.
Okay.
And so one of the qualities of a Sotapan then is that he is 100% determined. What is he determined? To end suffering in this present moment. And if you are absolutely determined to bring suffering to an end in this moment, then you're more than likely going to be successful. In fact, the Buddha guarantees it.
Okay.
Talks about it in 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
Talks about it as 7 lifetimes. Talks about it as 7 months. But in any case, it's a guarantee.
Right.
Once you reach that full-on determination that no matter what, I'm going to end suffering in this present moment, then that's going to take you, because you see the 4th and the 5th fetters are greed and ill will. So if you are determined to bring ill will to an end, then when you have ill will coming up in your mind, you can know that and you can put a stop to it before it leaks out.
Right.
Or if it does leak out, another way of looking at Sotapan, the Sotapan may get into an argument, but he's only going to make 7 points before he recognizes you should wake up and shut up.
Yeah.
In other words, we don't argue on and on and on and on. We just sort of give it a miss.
Yeah.
All right.
Take a step out.
And so by doing that, we eventually, as Sotapan, are able to get rid of those lower fetters. A lot of people think that their job right away is to end ill will and to end greed. No, what we do before, as process becoming Sotapan, is we study the stuff and we develop the skills. And part of the skill is the determination to bring the stuff to an end. Okay. So we'll talk more and more about what it is to be Sotapan, and it's an important point, almost to the point that you can think of enlightenment as only a 2-stage process.
Right.
And in fact, if you look at the word enlightenment, you get the clue. Now, I do recognize the word enlightenment is a word that the Buddha never used.
Right.
Not only that, but the word enlightenment and what was originally was intended to be used for has been misapplied to Buddhism.
Right.
Okay, if you really want an enlightenment, you got to have a French Revolution, including guillotines and science and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
You know, murdering Catholics, and it just goes really crazy. But when we look at enlightenment in the sense of Buddhism, we look at that word light because that's the primary word. And we recognize that, oh, we have two uses for that word light. One is like turning on the lights, or it's daylight. We can see what's going on. We can see. So we refer to the enlightenment that is knowledge of recognizing what's going on. That's the state of Sotapanna. Then the second quality of enlightenment is deliverance.
Right.
That means the finishing off of the fetters, the being rid of that stuff. So one, we figure out what the job is to do and how to do it. And then the next part of the job is get her done. And those are the two stages of enlightenment. In that regard, the Sotagami and the Anagami are not important because, in fact, they're just pointing at the lower fetters of the feelings of not liking and liking, which wind up as greed and ill will.
So getting to stream entry is about the development of the skills that will finish your journey to enlightenment, would you say?
That's one way of stating it.
Yep.
There are other ways of stating it, but that's one way of stating it, is the Sotapanna is the one who has gotten all the preparatory skills and the knowledge together to do the job. That all of the religions in the world know that that job has got to be done, but they do not offer this intermediate stage of Sotapanna. So the Christians are left with their greed, ill will, and delusion, and a Jesus to help them out of it.
Right.
But they already know about the greed, ill will, and delusion. Or maybe not the deluded part. They may be too deluded to realize that they're deluded. But they do know that the problem is greed. The love of money is the root of all evil, right there in the Bible.
Right.
Okay, so they know that greed is a problem. And that harming other people, that is basically right there in the Ten Commandments. So the problem is known in all of the religions. It's only the Buddhist religion that gives you the next two things, is not just the knowledge that the problem exists, but the knowledge and the skills that it takes to bring it to an end. So psychology is very excellent at diagnosis. Christianity, very good at diagnosis. Islam, fairly good at diagnosis. They're so deluded that they sometimes are having a whole lot of trouble making a diagnosis. But in general, that's where the situation lies, is everybody can diagnose the illness when they have a certain basis of information. Let us call it a frame of reference. When you take a situation and put it into a frame of reference, you can see what the problem is. Okay? But you don't have a solution to the problem. That's what the beginning and the process of becoming a Sotapanna. And what that skill really is the skill to recognize suffering as suffering.
Right.
And then the skill, once we recognize suffering as suffering, and we have a strong mind, that we can start to change it. Okay? And so now we begin to see those two skills. One is to see suffering as suffering, not just see a problem as a problem. That in fact, seeing a problem as a problem is a problem.
Right.
Seeing a situation as just a situation is not a problem.
Yeah, that's a completely different way of looking at it.
And that's why we have, as the second, I'm not going to use the word step. The second aspect of the Eightfold Noble Path is right intention. We have to start changing our intentions, or I like a better word would be attitude.
Right. Okay.
Sometimes it's translated as right thought, but you can see really what they're talking about is getting down to is a right attitude. a way of leaning, an inclination,
Mm-hmm.
right inclination. Well, in science and in engineering, attitude is used quite commonly. An example would be an airplane. If an airplane has a flat or level attitude, it's going to travel. If it has an attitude like this, it's going to lose altitude. If it has an attitude like this without an increase in power, it's also going to lose altitude.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now you see a building, especially a high-rise building. If that building is completely perpendicular so that all of the forces come straight down through gravity, then it's got the right attitude.
Mm-hmm.
If it's leaning, then that means that you have to have other support systems in there or it's going to fall over like in a high wind. Okay, so part of the way of looking at it is that when we have the right noble view, then we'll have, or that with right noble effort, we will have then right noble attitude, which means to get up and dust yourself off and start all over again is again
Right.
part of the right attitude.
Okay.
Okay, so it's a process. But let's go back now and talk about how we're going to get started, rather than talking about the later or deeper stages.
Yeah.
Just back basic stage one again to make sure that we're on the same page with how to practice.
Yep.
So, how long do you sit? How often do you sit? What is it that you're doing when you're sitting, etc.? What is your
Okay.
formal practice?
Um. So I've been practicing. I haven't been practicing as much lately. I've been doing some more informal practice, like if I drive, I know what I'm aware of. In my sitting practice, I'll either do some sort of. I've been working with Rob Burbe's imaginal work a bit, but I've also been doing. I usually do some sort of breath meditation, like pretty much always will default back to breath or body-based meditation, sort of like how Than Bhikkhu would teach it. I just find it the most enjoyable and the easiest for me to sort of stick with. Generally, in length of sit, I'll go like 30 to 50 minutes once or twice a day when I'm practicing with full steam. Right now, though, I'd say about it's like 30 minutes every day, either walking or sitting.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And when you're sitting, what do you do?
Um, so I'll start by, I set my posture up so I'm pretty good. And then I start focusing on the breath. I just sort of get a comfortable breath going. I try and stick with it a bit. And then I start circulating the breath through different points of the body. So the navel, left side of the abdomen, right side of the abdomen, solar plex, the right flank, so the rib sort of cage, left rib cage, chest,
Okay.
shoulder area, and then and then go all the way back down the spine.
All right. Okay. What you're referring to there is the step 3 of Anapanasati, which is experiencing the body. This is an important quality. So you're beyond that. Now, let me make sure about the practice of Anapanasati. It's the mistake that most students make is that they follow the way that it's done formally.
Right.
So that the Buddha talks about it in this formal way, and then Bhikkhu Buddhadasa will also talk about it in that formal way. But when he gets way deep down into it, let us say 230 pages into a book on Anapanasati, he finally gets down to saying, this is the first thing you need to do.
Right. Okay.
All right. Well, the students have been reading the book and been practicing all of the stuff that was in the first part of the book, you see, and so there's a mistake that's being made there. So let me start off with this, that Anapanasati just like the Anapanasati Sutta says, is of great fruit and great benefit, and that it will lead to Iddhyapada, it will lead to the powers. We'll talk about that later. But that we practice Anapanasati for the fulfillment of the four foundations of mindfulness, the Satipatthana. We practice the Satipatthana, the four foundations of mindfulness, for the fulfillment of the Sambhojana, the seven factors of enlightenment. All right. Now, we can also see that there are relationships between the seven factors of enlightenment, when practiced correctly, and the Four Noble Truths.
Yeah.
That the Four Noble Truths and the seven factors of enlightenment are really intertwined. So that by practicing the Four Noble Truths, you're also practicing this, the seven factors of enlightenment, and we practice that for knowledge and deliverance. So these 2 points of knowledge and deliverance are seen in many places. One is in the Great 40, another one is in the Anapanasati Sutta, but it's a normal part. And this is where we look at, this is enlightenment. The first enlightenment is knowledge. The second enlightenment is deliverance. But we're already looking at, in fact, if there is no soul, you're already delivered from a God.
Right. Okay.
Wow. Just knowledge is enough for that deliverance. Okay? So let's go a little bit deeper in that level, because I like it when students recognize like that. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so let's go a little bit deeper on that one. And that is that the atheist and the Christians are very, very close together. There's only one small difference between an atheist and a Christian, and that is that the atheists think that the soul dies when the atheist dies.
Right.
In Buddhist literature, that's talked like this: that at the breakup of the body, there is the annihilation of the being.
That's wrong view.
Pardon?
That's wrong view. That annihilationism is wrong view, and then what is the other one? It's eternalism is wrong view as well.
Right. These are wrong views. Okay. By the way, did you get that from Ajahn Brahm? Did he?
Beg your pardon? The what in particular? What I said?
About rebirth is wrong view, anatta is right view. Did you ever hear that from Ajahn Brahm?
No, I didn't think I ever did, actually, because he talks about rebirths and stuff.
Yeah, I know. He hasn't quite figured out the Dhamma yet.
Right. Okay.
And I was asking you that question because I knew that about him so many, many years ago, and I haven't been keeping track, so I wanted to find out what he was teaching. All right. So he's still stuck in Buddhist religion, teaching Buddhist religion. It has value, but it's not liberating. And here's why. If there is something to be reborn, then whatever it is to be reborn is still under the subject of the laws of karma. No freedom.
Right.
The atheist also, going back to the atheist, the annihilation and destruction of the being at the point of death means that up until the point of death, the atheist is still under the rules of God, under the rules of religion, under the rules of the government, under the rules of society. All right. But if there is no self at all, and that the only thing that when a self does arise, or let us say there's no such thing as a permanent or long-lasting self, it's always very temporary, and when it does arise, it's always associated with suffering. That in fact you could go so far as to say that suffering needs a self to suffer. If there's no self, there is no suffering.
Right.
Okay,
suffering only exists in the judgment that I'm making about an event. If the event, if I'm not reacting to the event, then it's just an event. The only way that the event can be termed to cause suffering is by me believing it causes suffering. Yeah.
Right. Attaching to it, all right, making it part of me. So Bhikkhu Buddhadasa says nothing is worth attaching to as I, me, or mine. You can attach to things that are not I, me, or mine, but if you're attaching to things that are I, me, or mine, you're in the four modes of clinging, which also the four modes of um, uh, instincts. The four modes of clinging are four modes of instinct. If you'll look up the four modes of clinging, clinging to self, clinging to materialism, clinging to rites, rules, and rituals, and clinging to views. These are the four modes of clinging. Now let me show you how that works exactly as instinctual. Clinging to a self is easy to see. Okay? Clinging to materialism is in fact the procreation instinct. It's our tools, it's our weapons. In fact, weapon. All tools are weapons.
Okay.
All tools are weapons. Your cell phone is a weapon. What do you mean my cell phone's a weapon? Well, you use it to kill time. And that's the procreation instinct, is our materialism, is our gathering up of tools. And one example of that can be seen in the cartoon. I've looked for it on the internet, but I haven't seen it in many, many years. I think, in fact, the version that I remember was a Far Side cartoon, but it's a picture of a Neanderthal or caveman wearing a bear rug as clothing. He's got his back to us, walking, carrying a big stick in his right hand, and in his left hand he has the hair of a woman, and he's dragging the woman who he has already knocked out with the stick into the cave. All right? That's not sex. That's not sexuality. It's power. That's what we have to come to understand, that it's the power to protect the self that is the procreation instinct. The sex part is actually quite minor. And in fact, if you would look at sex objectively, the whole idea just looks dangerous, petty, dirty, ugly, yucky. Who would want to do that? The answer is anyone who likes it so much that they will disregard all of the problems of sex in order to have it because they like it. It's about feeling. All right? And that our genes have played an enormous trick on us. It's all instinctual. It goes way, way back. It goes so far back that you can imagine that there were primitives, hunter-gatherers or whatever, and one group of them liked sex. They found it pleasurable, and the others saw right through it, recognized what a terrible, dirty, ugly situation that was, and look how much psychological damage is done between men and women over sex, and so they don't want to have anything to do with it. Guess who we're the descendants of? The ones who liked sex, or the ones who... So you can see how it's built into the genes to like sex. But once we see what it is, we recognize it all. We may like it a lot, but it's pretty yucky stuff. It needs some wisdom rather than just participation.
Can't just jump in straight to it without thinking about it.
Right, because I like it so much, I'm not even going to pay attention to it. All right. If we can see that second underlying tendency of that power for grabbing pleasure, or that power, we can see it more as an instinct of power rather than merely sex.
Okay.
But you can also see sex in the nesting instinct. Okay, because what is a nest? A nest is a place where animals go when it's dangerous, and they huddle together for safety. And when is it most dangerous? At night, when we can't see snakes crawling around, and so we want to build a nest. But if we're going to have a whole lot of people or monkeys or animals or a herd of whatever in a small space, they need to cooperate with each other. All right, and this is where the rules come from. That's why the nesting instinct, the Buddha talks about it in the sense of sila bhatta paramasa, the rites, rules, rituals, and things like that. But it's the territorial instinct that makes us really tribal. We start tribal, but it's really that. And how the territorial instinct is manifest. The dogs here, they still have territory as territory. Their territory is bounded. Actually, the humans made the boundaries, but the dogs respect them. A boundary would be a road or a property boundary, or this is our house and that house over there is not our house, that's not our property. Humans, though, have so, let us say, misappropriated and mishandled our instinctual way that we've managed to turn our territorial instinct into views, into the banners of identifying with organizations. This is us, that's them.
Yeah,
I'm
in-group,
white,
out-group.
they're good, they're black, they're bad.
Yeah,
Except
yeah.
if you're over there, and then we just say, well, I'm black, and I've got jigaboo in me, and those poor old white trash, they don't even know how to do anything. Okay, so I'm black, and I'm good, and they're white, and they're bad. And you can see how the territorial situation gets stuck there. But when we stop identifying with white, stop identifying with black, stop identifying with Republican or Democrat or Aussie or Chinese or American or whatever like that, then we no longer are subject to the vagaries of the suffering that those organizations go through. But when we attach to them as my political party or my race, then anything that happens with that is going that causes suffering to some members of that organization because I belong to it. In my own mind, I suffer too. So one of the freedoms of suffering is to stop identifying with things that cause us suffering.
Okay.
Okay, and these are how these instincts operate. Is that we operate ignorantly, and when we operate ignorantly, that means that we operate through instincts. And most humans still operate on an instinctual level. To become a Buddha means that we have to have the frontal cortex, the smart, the wise part of us, actually take control and no longer allow the instinctual brain to be in charge. So much of what we talk about in the process of waking up or the process of enlightenment is actually the process of the frontal cortex taking control of your life and not operating instinctually or ignorantly anymore.
Okay.
Okay, so these instincts, these four primary instincts, give rise to the four types of suffering. And so the third noble truth, which I'm trying to introduce now, means that we are free of these four kinds of suffering. And the Buddha talks about it in the sense of the trench, the banner, the bolt, and the bar. The trench, the banner, the bolt, and the bar. These are the four freedoms. All right. And what we mean by that is that the freedom from the trench is to give up our territorial instinct. The freedom of the banner is to give up our identity or giving up our group identity, which is the nesting instinct. The next one is to give up the weapon, to drop the bolt, or drop the bar in the sense of a crossbar or a crossbow or the hilt of a knife, any of those kinds of things. But we're talking about tools or weapons. Bhikkhu Buddhadasa talks about it, materialism, that we stop being materialistic in the sense that we stop thinking that we're going to get our protection from our goods. Remember that the procreation instinct is for the protection of the organism, the self. And so when we are able to be secure in ourselves, we don't need weapons. We don't need tools. We become free from them.
Okay.
Okay, and a way that you can see that, by the way, is when the monks go on Tudong, they take every worldly possession they have and carry it with them. How would life be like with you if everything that you owned you had to keep in your car and keep it with you wherever you went?
Pretty stressful. Pretty
Well,
cramped.
actually, it might be stressful to get rid of that stuff. It might wind up being quite a freedom. Because in fact, you can't travel, you can't go anywhere because it would be distressful about what you're doing, what you have. An example of this was, well, why don't I take my family and go to India? Well, if I go to India, then what am I going to do with this house?
Mm.
All right. All
Right.
right. It can't just go to India. It can't just go to America. We've got all of this crap that we've got to deal with. Okay. So if we're
Protect and
not
look after.
materialistic, then we've got no problems.
Right. Okay.
Going back now, one more visit at this point to Silabhata Paramasa is the atheist
Mhm.
who thinks that there's an existing self that dies means that because he exists and therefore is under the powers of whoever's making the rules at that time.
Mm.
So an atheist, in fact, here's something that's quite amazing. I don't know about it being true in Australia, but in America, they've got a lot of evidence to prove that in those, and they do it by the counties that are mostly atheist, as opposed to those counties in the United States that are mostly Christian. The Christian counties have more divorce, they have more incarceration, they have more alcoholism, they have more vagrancy or homelessness. And biggest of all is that they have more domestic violence than,
Really?
than those counties that are atheist.
Huh.
Atheists do not go to jail. Atheists do not go to beat up their wives. If anything, they'll find a Christian to beat up on, but never mind about it. But what that shows is that the Christians are wrong when they say that only morality comes from God, and our Christianity has a God, therefore only we can be moral. But now, when you
Very
see that the Christians are the big supporters of Donald Trump, one of the biggest criminals in the world, you begin to scratch your head on that one. But when you
bit of a nubbin
recognize that, no,
scratcher.
in fact, atheists are more moral than Christians by and large. Why? Because they recognize they've got social responsibilities, that they do not put it back to God. Therefore, atheists are just as stuck in Silabhata Paramasa as the Christians are. But it's only when we recognize that there is no self that is subject to the laws of man, that is only my feelings that have to be managed, then therefore I can give up all the laws of man also and take on a new law, a brand new law. Now, this is not taught in Buddhist religion. They teach you, no, no, we've got all these precepts and everything, but the new law is the law of the Buddha, which is the teaching of the Buddha. And the Buddha says, I only teach one thing. I do not teach for the atheist. I teach only one thing, and that's dukkha, dukkha nirodha.
The cessation of dukkha.
The cessation of dukkha should be your only rule.
Right.
And all of the other rules you can just forget about.
Okay.
Here's an example. You've got a guy that's dressed in a special hat, got a special ID, he's got several special IDs, perhaps a badge, and he's certainly going to be dressed up in a fancy suit, driving a fancy car with all kinds of words all over it. This is true regardless of what the words say, and that in English, this guy will call himself a cop, a policeman, a deputy, a sheriff, something like this. And he's got his car out there, and so do you, and he stops you. It would not be a wise thing to say, hey, man, I like that really silly suit that you've got on, but you should go tell your boss that neither he nor you have any power over me at all. That's not a good thing to say to him.
Definitely not.
Because why? Because you're going to create suffering for him, and he's going to try to return it to you in spades.
Give
Okay?
you a gift back with then some.
Exactly, because he's not used to being treated nobly. All right, so that means that we treat ordinary people with respect and dignity that they would expect. So we can use some social, but the real intention, the real issue is suffering and no suffering, not whatever laws or rules of man. Because any laws or rules that man makes, even if they say they're God's rules, they're made at a point in time, And then very soon after that, someone will try to find the loopholes in the laws. In other words, there are no laws that are good for all time.
Right.
All laws are temporary. And almost always, laws are made at a time when there's a need for that law. And as soon as the law is passed, people can already find out the problems with that law.
Far out.
So,
I'm just sitting with that one, actually. Far out. Okay.
well, now you're beginning to see why the Buddha put Sila Bhatta Paramasa, attachment to rites, rules, and rituals, at such a high place that he did, that it comes number 2 on his list of big issues.
Right.
The first issue on the list is, who am I?
Mm-hmm. Question of self.
And once you recognize that there is no self, then you also recognize that the self that was subject to all those laws, rules, rituals, and regulations is actually a wrong way of looking. That since there is no self, there should be no laws, rituals, rules, or organizations. In fact, trying to follow those is not the path. You can do anything and everything that any spiritual teacher ever told you to do, and it will not be liberating. Only you can figure out what needs to be done. Only you can figure out for you what the Eightfold Noble Path is. And the way that I say that is with knowledge and vision of what is the path and what is not the path.
Okay.
And what is not the path is following other people's rules.
Right.
You have to learn to live by your own set of rules. You become a unique individual. You become a horn. You become a lion. You become a unified mind.
Okay.
Because as long as you're subject to the rules and the vagaries of society, you're going to be pushed and pulled and slipped and pulled apart by society because it's not unified. For you to become unified, you've got to drop society. You've got to drop the rules and find a higher calling. This is the state of Sotapan. Is that one who has become the one that has that higher calling. And he did it through dedication, through determination. He demands it of himself that he leave that society and become his own unique individual. This is the path of Sotapan. And I get nobody explain that to you in quite that way so that you understand that this is a change of attitude. Wow. And that's all. Okay. Becoming a Sotapan is merely a change of attitude. And that attitude change is suffering and no suffering as opposed to doing all of the other stuff. So next time you call, I'll go into more detail about what becoming a Sotapan is. But again, we want to go back to the idea of the practice. And the way to go back is to talk about it in the sense of anapanasati is for the fulfillment of the 4 foundations of mindfulness. The 4 foundations of mindfulness is all of you.
All of me.
All of you. The body, the feelings, the mind, and all the states that the mind can have. This is the Satipatthana, which means if we're going to practice Anapanasati correctly, Anapanasati has to cover all of you. It's got to cover all of the bases.
Right. Feeling.
All right, now, and the student will immediately ask, well, how am I going to do that? The answer is one by one as they occur. Mm-hmm. One by one as they occur. When something comes up, it's time to deal with it. Here's how that operates. When the student sits down to meditate and he's watching his breath, when the mind wanders away from the breath and it's wandering, he's not meditating. When he recognizes that the mind has wandered away from the breath, he's immediately done something new. He has decided that he's looking at his mind now. He's investigating the mind, and he's found that the mind at this particular time is not focused. It's unfocused. So he's, in fact, doing step 9 of Anapanasati, experiencing the mind. We begin to experience the mind immediately when we recognize the mind has wandered away from the breath. The next thing that we do is we change the attitude. The attitude change is from, oh no, the mind is a monkey mind into, aha, I caught you.
Mhm.
Because before, when the mind was wandering away, it was wandering away ignorantly. Now we've caught it, which means now it's wandering away mindfully,
Right.
wisely. We can see it. Sati has arisen. Congratulate yourself for that sati having arisen at that moment. Aha, I can see you. By doing that, we're now doing step 10 of Anapanasati, gladdening the mind. Eventually, the gladdening of the mind will begin to affect the feelings of the mind, or the feelings. But in the beginning, we begin this way. You're on the breath, then you go to the mind, and you recognize the mind is wandered away. We're also, because it's wandered away, we're also looking at the objects of the mind, the wandering. And so we take a look at that, and then we drop it, and we bring it back to the mind, and now we're bringing the mind back, not wandering. We're bringing it back now in a bit of concentration, a bit of focus. We've got an intention now. All right, so you can begin to see already that, hey, we've got all four of the Satipatthana built right into Anapanasati.
Mm.
We're using just the breathing just to get started. Why? Because it's the biggest thing that happens when you're sitting completely secluded. The Buddha was really big on seclusion. You got to get away from the world and get your mind secluded. For instance, very few meditation teachers will advise students to meditate while watching television, eating popcorn, and drinking beer. And if they do that, they'll say also, they probably won't say, also bring your mother-in-law into the room and let her start yelling at you. And now you're set up. Now that you've got the television on and you're eating popcorn, drinking beer, and have Aunt Susie or your mother-in-law yelling at you, now you're ready for meditation. No, that's not the way it's taught. It's taught, get into seclusion. The Buddha has an analogy of a log. If a log is in a bog, completely submerged, if a man who has a fire stick, can he set that log on fire? The clear answer is no, it's underwater. Well, what if he takes that log out of the swamp and puts it on the beach? Can he now set it on fire? The answer is no, it's still waterlogged. But if he leaves that log in the sun, drying out, turning it over occasionally, will he then be able to set that log on fire?
Yes.
The answer is yes, there are ways of doing it. It may not be easy because the interior may still be wet, but there'll be enough dry that you can get it started. That's what we're looking for. We need to get into seclusion. We need to get out of the bog of the world so that we can start to dry the mind out. Okay. This is why we do it. We do not want Aunt Susie. We do not want popcorn and beer and TV. We want to be completely alone and secluded so that we can start to look at what the mind is like right now. And as we do that, we begin to recognize, oh, the mind is full of crap. And guess where that crap came from? It came from Aunt Susie and the beer and the popcorn and the television. Mm-hmm. But we have to get away from that stuff before we can recognize that, oh, I brought that stuff into the mind, and now the mind is thinking about it. Let me be in seclusion, which means the first state of seclusion is to get away from it physically. The second state of seclusion is to start to getting away from it mentally, to change the attitude. And the attitude is, the change of attitude is, what I'm thinking about is not important when it's just the mind wandering. There's work that needs to be done, and the mind needs to pay attention to what needs to be done in order to get that work done. That's part of the determination. I become determined that I'm not going to let the mind wander, which means any and every time I catch it wandering away, I throw out whatever was in there and come back to the breath. When we do that formally, that means the only thing that's difference between formal and informal is not posture, it's seclusion.
Right.
Okay? Formal meditation is done in seclusion. Informal meditation is done with seclusion, not such a big deal.
Okay. Wow. That's very interesting, actually.
So that if you learn how to do it in seclusion well enough, then you can do seclusion meditation right there on Times Square. Why? Because you're paying attention to what's happening on the inside, not paying attention to what's on the outside. Now, surprisingly enough, our senses become part of that's the connection between the inside and the outside world. So we want to get away from the outside world by secluding ourselves, but we're not going to stay secluded. If we just stay secluded all the time, then we'll wind up like one of the jhana dudes in Burma. I've been around those guys. I've seen them, and they've got no life. Believe me.
They just sit in jhana all day, every day.
Just sitting in jhana. They'll get up maybe twice a day, once to get food and another to take a pee. Some of them spend all night doing that. Some of them will lay down in the meditation hall for a few hours, but normally they're trying to outsit each other.
Oh, wow.
And it becomes a contest.
A monk dick measuring contest?
Yes, a sitting contest by monks. They do that kind of stuff. But that's Buddhist religion. That's not noble. Mm-hmm. In fact, the noble may be sitting in the back of the meditation hall snickering. And the guys in the front of the hall are not in seclusion. So, now we're beginning to see that all Anapanasati is much more complete, because that means in order to do Anapanasati correctly, we have to deal with the body, deal with the feelings, deal with the mind in all of its aspects. So in that regard, in the Anapanasati Sutta, there are actually 16 stages of Anapanasati. For each of the four aspects of the Satipatthana. So there's going to be 4 aspects of Anapanasati devoted to body, 4 aspects of Satipatthana devoted to feeling, or Anapanasati, 4 aspects of Anapanasati dealing with the mind, and 4 aspects of Anapanasati dealing with mind objects. All right. Now, the way that it's stated in the Anapanasati Sutta is basically for the beginners, in the sense of seeing just the temporariness, just the fading away, just the the actual death, and the relinquishment. The relinquishment is actually kind of high. So basically, what it looks like is that in all respects, the first 2 of the 4 are for beginners, and the second 2 are for the advanced. Okay. What does that mean? Let's take the mind as an example. The 4 aspects of the mind are to experience the mind, to gladden the mind, to empty the mind, and to be free of the mind. Emptying and being free, or setting the mind free, are higher things to do. Now let's look at the 4 in mental objects, which is also in Pali called the Dhammanupassana. In the Dhammanupassana, in the beginning, we see temporariness and we see how things rot away. Later, we go into cessation and relinquishment. Now, this word relinquishment the Pali word is atammayata. Atammayata. You probably heard the word Maya. In the Buddhist religion, Maya is double. It can also be thought of as a world. Okay. But in fact, Maya is also in the mind. Right. That the Buddha, in his time of enlightenment, when he's under the bo tree, he has to deal with Maya and his 3 daughters. What are the 3 daughters of Maya? Lobha, Nobha, Dosa. The 3 causes of suffering, or the second noble truth. So you can say that Mara is actually suffering itself, and his 3 daughters are the cause of suffering. So in that regard, atammayata means, the word tam means to do. Atam means to not do. Mara. To not have anything to do with Mara means to not have anything to do with suffering. To throw it out. To get rid of it. Now, how Atam is actually used in Thailand is when two people are disgusted with each other, they won't have anything to do with each other. Atam is not how you treat another person. Atam means I'm not going to tolerate Maya in the mind.
No world in the mind, nothing
Yes,
external.
not tolerated. Out it goes.
So the practice, Mara, I see you, that's really saying, world, I see you, or suffering, I see you.
Yes, exactly. So in the beginning, it's wandering mind. Aha, I see you, wandering mind.
Right.
Now it becomes eventually, aha, suffering, I see you.
Right.
In that regard, it becomes, instead of anapanasati, it becomes panyasati, or satipanya. The word for wisdom, okay? To be mindful for wisdom.
Oh, wow.
All right?
Okay.
Satipanya means, aha, I can see you suffering and I'm not going to mess with you.
Wow. All right. I feel like I've just had these little bits and pieces that you're like linking together, and it's like, oh, pennies are just dropping.
Yes, that's the way that it is to be taught. You can automatically, you can see the teaching of the Buddha as something like a Chinese wood puzzle, the block puzzle. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, no, sorry.
Okay, there is, when it's all put together, it looks like a Rubik Cube.
Mm-hmm.
Except that when you pull it apart, every piece becomes unique. It's sort of like a jigsaw puzzle, but it's a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle where the pieces are in 3 dimensions. And that when you take this puzzle apart, you wind up with like 10, 20, 30 pieces of the puzzle. Your job now is to put it back together. Okay, to get it, all right? My job is to take that puzzle apart, called the Dhamma, and present it one piece at a time and show you how this piece fits with that piece. And now it's your job to take all of these pieces and put it back together. The Dhamma is a unit. There's only one thing. The Buddha teaches only one thing, and he says he teaches only one thing. Dukkha, dukkha nirodha. That's the only thing the Buddha teaches, but you have to unravel it. You have to take it apart. You have to really see what's going on, and then you put it all back together again. And that's actually what makes the mind unified, is when the Dhamma becomes unified. When you know that you know. So the Sotapanna is one who is beyond a shadow of a doubt about what to do and how to do it.
All right. Okay, that's cleared up a lot of things, actually. Wow.
That was my intention.
Yeah. Well, your intent has been achieved. Okay, so then therefore, by that definition, I would not be a stream entrant, since I'm still seeking guidance. Otherwise, like you said, I wouldn't need you, since I could just direct myself from that point onwards.
Exactly. All right. But I didn't tell you that. I said that it was more than likely not. I did not accuse you of anything because I'm not sure. In fact, at one time when you started talking about anatta, I said, well, this guy's already making some progress here. And in that regard, you're already experiencing the path of Sotapanna.
Okay.
But the Sotapanna path is not the same as the full fruition of Sotapanna. I'm talking about the full fruition of Sotapanna, but the very first step is that step of, I know that no matter how obstructed the mind is, I can clean it out. Okay. The second step is that I know that I can do the first jhana. I can apply my mind and keep it focused long enough to see the Four Noble Truths, which is the third one, is to inspect the teaching of the Dhamma and the Buddha to the point that we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that the teaching of the Buddha is the right way, that Christianity is not the right way, that the Buddha's got it nailed. Psychology, got a problem. Psychiatry, got a problem. Neuroscience, on its way. Come on, baby, I vote for neuroscience. You're coming to the Buddha very quickly, okay? but that the Buddha is it. This is the tipping point between the path of the sotapan and the fruit of the sotapan. The tipping point is when you got the Dhamma nailed. You know it. And then that tipping point takes you, and by the way, this is the first 3 steps of 7. The next point is when you become absolutely bound and determined for no suffering. This determination is step 4, and that's the real pivot point. In fact, that's a huge milestone, because now you are determined to end suffering. And so you begin to become more and more dedicated. Step 5, go back to step 4. Step 4, demand for honesty, would be like if a monk had done some offense, then he wants to immediately confess it. He wants to get it off his chest. Not like Christian confession. Christian confession, they do Christian confession so that they can get a punishment, and then they can go back and do whatever they want to do. So they have to keep coming back to the confession over and over and over again. If a Buddhist monk is really confessing, he brings whatever it was that he's confessing to a stop.
Right.
This is actually the preliminary to the Patty Walk. Some places do it every 2 weeks, others do it once a month. But the preliminary for the is that the monks will have a little passage, but they'll do it in private. And they come and they say that I will confess any of my things, but that's too formal. The right way to do it is for the monk to go to his teacher before the ceremony and to get it off his chest. Because we don't want that care. Now, normal people, ordinary, non-normal people who are trying to protect the self, self-preservation instinct, means we do not know and we do not want to know what's wrong with us. So if I make a mistake, I'm going to cover it up, perhaps with a lie.
Right. But what are we afraid of finding out?
Right. So I'm afraid that somebody's going to find out and judge me. That person who makes that thought is making a huge mistake, because the suffering that he is incurring at that point in time, he hasn't even been caught yet, and he's still suffering. What if they do catch me? And so he starts telling himself the lie before he actually has to tell the lie out loud.
Right.
But the noble is one who really wants to know what we've done wrong so that we can stop it. Why? Because that's suffering. So hiding is what an ordinary person does in order to get away with. He thinks he's getting away because he doesn't understand the nature of suffering. He thinks that suffering is going to come from the boss or the cop or the mom or the teacher or the overlord or whoever it is that's going to punish him from doing wrong. He doesn't realize that he's punishing himself already before mama or the preacher or the captain comes. He's already suffering.
And in fact, I guess the only punishment comes from the self then, because if there's no self, then there's nothing that does suffer.
Exactly correct. All right, so let's give you 2 examples of that. You're in the interrogation room and you have the police. They've left you in the interrogation room long enough for you to get really bored and anxious and what are they doing and all of these kind of things. And then the good cop and the bad cop come in with their routine and they know how to put you under stress. And everybody goes under stress except for a noble. And when these 2 cops come in and the noble says, "Hi guys, how you doing?" "I'm really glad to see you. I suppose you're going to do the good cop, bad cop routine on me. Which one of you is the good cop and the bad cop? I tell you what, before you get started, why don't you 2 guys swap roles so we can make all of this interesting? You're the bad cop. You be the good cop and you be the bad cop, and you just completely confuse them. Why? Because you're not subject to the pressure that they're putting you under, because you realize they can't put you under pressure. Only you can do that.
Okay. Wow.
Second example. These 2 cops actually get you convicted, and now they throw you into a cell. And you're in a private cell. Why do they put you in a private cell? It's because you spoke the truth to them, and that was really, really a crime. And so they really want to punish you, and they put you in solitary confinement. That's the best they can do, is to put people in solitary confinement.
Alone with themselves.
Right, but a noble? Oh, thank you very much. I don't even have to go to Bendabat. You're feeding me all, and this cell is so nice. Thank you very much. Okay, it's all about attitude again.
Right, okay.
Yeah, okay, so everything comes out to be attitude. Now, eventually death is going to come.
Mm-hmm.
If we can have a good attitude when death comes, now we've got it.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, if you recognize that you're going to be unafraid, even at the point of death, then you can accept death happily.
Because I read something about this. Do you know what metacognitions are? Metacognitions?
Metacognition.
Cognitions. So, like, metacognitions. It's basically...
Oh, metacognition.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't hear you correctly. All right.
Sorry about that. So they said, I was reading about it. It's sort of an unrelated concept to, or maybe it is, but they're in the intro to the paper I was reading. They said that metacognition started, like the development of it started with the idea of the knowledge that we're going to die. So could we say that being like Dharma is sort of realizing, or Dhamma is really realizing that and being completely okay with that?
Let us say that it's one of the deeper teachings.
Okay.
That we recognize that to end suffering, I've got to be free from the fear of death. Mm-hmm. And that once I'm free from the fear of death, then what else is there to happen? The worst thing that can happen is death. There's
nothing else they can really do to you.
There's nothing else they can do to you. In fact, they can't do anything to you. Only you can do that. Even only you can die.
Oh, wow.
Right? and it's often a choice. Mm-hmm. It's often a choice. When it's a choice, it's euthanasia. And in most countries, it's against the law. Why? Because they want to be in charge of your death. Mm-hmm. Especially the doctors, because they can make money.
Slap you in a home for a while.
Lock you up, exactly. So, real freedom is freedom from the gods, and it's freedom from all of the rites, rules, and rituals, and freedom from the society. And eventually, we become free from even our own feelings. Feeling of fear, feeling of not liking. And once you have control of your feelings, now because you're in control of the feelings, the unification of mind really starts to set in.
Okay.
So that they can't even bother you by threatening you, because there is no threat that you will accept. The only thing that you can say to any threat is, well, come on, do your worst. Let's see what you can do. Let's see if I can handle that one too. And in fact, in that regard, I would say that the higher jhanas, if I were going to be teaching the jhanas, I would primarily invite two kinds of students. Mm-hmm. One would be CIA operatives who are intending to be tortured. Mm-hmm. Because Goenka's scanning technique and some other things like that will really help people to manage being tortured. If you can sit in strong determination sitting and not move your legs and not move your eyes while your body is just creaking up the way that it happens for students in the Goenka retreats, and they call it strong determination, then he can do it. The second group, by the way, are those committed Christians who want to crucify themselves. They need jhana. They need Anapanasati step 3 really, really big time.
Yeah, they would.
And in fact, if they do it correctly, they can stay up on that cross and continue to breathe. Never mind, because why? Because breathing becomes really difficult. Mm-hmm. But if you've got the strong determination, take that breath. Take another one already. I know it's a word, but take that breath. That you can stay up on that cross for a long, long time as long as you keep breathing. But you have to determine that you're going to breathe, which means in that regard, at that place, the Caesars never killed Spartacus or all of those 6,000. They just hung them up to dry. It was Spartacus who decided to die when he decided to stop breathing.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
We really are in control of our lives, and it's hard to recognize that.
Oh,
Why? Because we've been playing victim.
wow.
You kill me. You put me up on this cross. It's your fault. Oh, no, it's not. I have choice over when I'm going to stop breathing.
Wow. Okay. This is really starting to come together a bit. All right. So
So
I've got.
this is the job of the Sotapan, is to bring this stuff together so that he can become free from suffering, because he has to know where it's coming from. Always suffering comes from within the mind, and we can choose to stop breathing and do that happily,
Mm-hmm.
because
Okay.
it's going to happen someday.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll get into what we can do to get ready for it. But meanwhile, I know that it's a long time, and we haven't really finished the topic that I was talking about, but that never happens with any of my students. I've never been able to teach all of the Dhamma all in one setting.
I wouldn't ask you to. It's too big to do.
Exactly. If you don't believe me, just look at the pile of books they call the it's Tapai Sidok, Tripitaka, the three
The
baskets, etc., like that.
It's a whole
Take
shelf, isn't it?
a whole shelf, right? A whole
Yeah.
bookcase.
Yeah. It's a lot.
Let's not do that old bookcase today. We've got other
Yeah.
things to do. All right. So, I think that we should spend just a bit of time, but I think that you've got it. I think that you know how to practice it. When the mind wanders away, the job is to bring it back joyfully,
Mm-hmm.
so that you begin to like this, just watching the breath. Now, during the day, when you're not doing formal practice, whenever you think about it, just take a deep breath.
Okay.
Just take a deep breath. Many times during the day. In fact, when you went to get the pencil, I just sat here and just enjoying the breath. Enjoy the moment. I live in, as you can tell by the photo, that I live in a paradise.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to do with my paradise what Adam and Eve did with theirs.
Very wise of you.
Yeah, I'm not going to destroy it by hating it.
Yeah, that's very good.
Yeah, Bhikkhu Buddhadasa is a big fan of that story of Adam and Eve. The judgment, you
Mm-hmm.
know? What it is eating of the fruit of knowledge of good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the knowledge of good and evil is my choice.
Mm-hmm.
And so so Adam and Eve destroyed their own paradise because they found something about it that they didn't like. One item after another, until they completely destroyed paradise because of what they liked and what they didn't like.
So you could see it as sort of an allegory for the knowledge of good and evil being the ingestion of self, or the knowledge of self, or probably more like it would be more fair to call it an apple of avidya, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm. And yet the Christians are all involved with the story itself rather than the moral of the story. I don't
Right.
know many Christians who will even understand that this is a moral, that there's a
Mm.
moral to this story. If you go around destroying paradise, guess where it went? And where you destroy paradise is in your own attitude, your own mind state.
Right.
But no, they get wrapped up in snakes
Mm.
and blaming women. That's a big one.
Yeah. It was the damn girl's fault.
Yeah, it's your fault. It's your fault. You
It's
did it. Exactly. So that's an aspect of noble. We don't blame anybody. We take on full responsibility. And in fact, as we do that and grow in the Dhamma, we begin to recognize that responsibility grows.
Mm-hmm.
And now we become actually, uh, in the original, we were subject to the sufferings and the vagaries of the societies and things. Now we become, let us say, subject to the Dhamma. That we gladly take on the greater Dhamma as the boss.
Right.
The big, big picture, the reality, the physics, the way that things work, the natural laws, the gravity. We
Right.
don't
It's all
go
Dharma.
around, Yeah, that's the Dhamma. The Dhamma is the sum total of all the laws that we can't break.
Right.
And all of men's laws can be broken.
Wow.
But the laws of Dhamma cannot be broken.
Right.
We are subject to the laws of Dhamma. And if we break that law, we'll suffer.
Okay.
Okay, so which means that as we grow in the Dhamma, we begin to take on more and more responsibility. Part of my responsibility is to teach the Dhamma to those who are willing to listen. But also my responsibility is to not teach students who do not want to learn the Dhamma. In that regard, we don't proselytize. We're only looking for good students.
Right. That's I heard an axiom of similar sort of thing in the Hermetic tradition. I was reading about it recently. They say when you're ready to hear knowledge, a teacher will appear, and the sort of the opposite of the thing for the teacher is do not cast the pearls before the swine. Mm-hmm. So I mean, it's probably a bit more of a judgmental way of looking at it than Buddhism.
Right. That's it's what you're saying is wisdom, but that wisdom is an ordinary wisdom.
Right, a mundane wisdom.
Mm-hmm. And here's the thing about when the student is ready, the teacher appears. Mm-hmm. That word appear is the right word. Why? Because teacher was already there. Right. It's only now the student can see the teacher right. as a teacher.
Because, yeah, I have actually known about you on Stream Entry for a while, but it was only now that it's sort of, you appeared, you know. But you've been here the whole time. That's what I do
when you push my button. And about the only buttons I've got left is on the computer. All the other buttons.
Washed off.
Ignored, I think, is possibly a better word to use.
Right.
Okay. All right. Well, actually, this has been a good time. Let's finish now. And I've given you a new perspective of how you practice. So later on, we'll go into more details about the way of practice and how to practice, etc., like that, as well as more understanding of what is the path. Eventually, we'll get into deep levels of the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Noble Path and how those things work together. Okay. We'll also do Paticca Samuppada, which is investigation of how the mind works.
Okay. Awesome.
Okay. All right. So we'll do that in the next few weeks together. Yep. And I would say that how often you call will be up to you.
Okay,
but
then.
It'd be better to call no more than twice a week and no more than once a week.
Right, then.
No, how to say that? Yeah. No less often than once a week and no more often than twice a week.
Okay, then. That actually works out like a pretty good schedule. I'll probably aim for once a week. Do you have anything you would like me to look up or recommend that I have a look at?
Buddhadasa would be one. And then in the Majjhima Nikaya, and you can get all kinds of stuff from him off of the internet.
Mm-hmm.
The first part of Sutta number 2, the Sabba-Asava Sutta. The Anapanasati Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 118.
Yep.
Satipatthana Sutta, Dingha Nikaya number 22, or in the Majjhima Nikaya number 10. Those would be the readings.
Yep.
If you want any extra readings, start with Sutta number 24, the chariot race, and we'll get into that later. And what I spent quite a lot of time today with you on was Sutta number 48.
One by one as they come?
Number 48 is the Kasambiyan Sutta.
Okay. All right, so just to make sure I got the Sutta listings, number 2, the Anapana, 24, 48, and...
118 is Anapanasati. Yep. Number 10, Satipatthana.
Yeah. All right. It's funny, I also was just intending to start reading the suttas as well. I was really I'm tired of hearing what the teachers have been saying. I want to actually read the Dharma directly. So this is quite well timed.
My job is to teach only the suttas.
Mm-hmm.
But when I find analogies, stories, and other things that come from modern science that make it useful,
Hmm.
or other Buddhist teachers, I'll use it.
Right.
But basically, I teach right out of the suttas, just like my teacher, Bhikkhu Buddhadasa.
Okay. All right.
And in
Well,
fact, when I first was a student of his, I was just gaga overly impressed with how well he knew the suttas, just down. But what I failed to understand was in the very early 1980s, most of the sutras that he could read in Thai language weren't even published in English yet.
wow.
Yeah, that the Majjhima Nikaya that Bhikkhu Bodhi put out didn't come out until 94, 95, something like that.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, that's very short ago. That's only 20 years.
Hmm. Well, the
20-ish.
explosion of the internet, all of Tanissaros, all of this stuff has happened all in the past 20 years.
Mm.
And so now I have access to the sutras. I find that my job is to catch up with Bhikkhu Buddhadasa. He already had the sutras in Thai. Now that we have the sutras in English, it's my responsibility,
Mm.
again, to go back and to find what he was teaching and where it was.
Right.
Okay, the the last time that that happened was when I was reading in the Digha Nikaya. I think it was number 22, when the Buddha was talking about. No, wait a minute, that was not it. Forget that. I don't remember the number. 15. Sorry, Digha Nikaya
No.
number 15. No, you don't need that. That's far too advanced. But what I wanted to
Okay.
point out is that I could not find in the sutras why Bhikkhu Buddhadasa was so big on feelings.
Right.
I know that the feelings are in there, but it's only that I recognize that it was in Sutra number 15 out of the Digha Nikaya that the Bhikkhu Buddhadasa got that there's a secret in there. It's like bang, and it's a one-liner.
Wow.
But that one-liner is, oh, you have to understand that feelings are everything. If you cannot manage your feelings, you will not become enlightened. You will be subject to the vagaries of your feelings until you learn how to control them. How are we going to learn how to do that? The answer is the
Okay.
skill of sati, the skill of investigation, the skill of um, right effort, the skill of joy. And in fact, I'm going right down through the 7 factors of enlightenment. By developing the 7 factors of enlightenment is the skills so that we can learn how to manage feelings.
Okay.
And that's a very big one. But I wanted to find out for sure that it was in the sutras why Bhikkhu Buddhadasa was so big on him, and I found it. I found the reference. And so that's one of the ways of looking at it, is to recollect or read his stuff and say, well, where did he get that?
Right.
Because his view of nibbana
Mhm.
is completely different than any other view that I've heard before. Bhikkhu Buddhadasa is unique in that. And he has a work called Nibbana for Everyone. This should be available on the internet. So that's a place to start. Nibbana for Everyone, because I expect you, the next time you call, to get the instructions of how to go into Nibbana and to operate with it, to start
Okay.
experiencing it, to start having little Nibbanas.
Alrighty.
Okay? And
Well,
so see what he has to say about Nibbana.
no worries. I'm quite excited for the next time we speak. I guess I'll message you closer to when a day lines up for me, and we
No, don't
can.
bother. No, no, no,
Okay.
no past, no future. Just when you call when you want to call, and I'll answer if I'm available.
Oh, okay. All right. No worries then. Thank you so
Otherwise, I'd
much.
have to have a to-do list and names and
Right.
places. Who says who's going to call when you know you call, and if I'm here, I'll answer.
All
And
right.
sometimes I'm on calls, and then I'll share them
Okay.
so the two guys can call at the same time, and then whoever called second can piggyback on who I was talking to first until he quits, and then if there's something new to do, then we'll do it with the second guy.
Okay.
The most that I've ever had at any one time was 4 students, all at the same time.
Oh, wow.
But that's been the most, 4 at one time. Mostly it's one-on-one.
Hmm.
All right, Ashley. Well, let's finish this up, and I'll see you next time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dhammarato. Look forward to speaking again.
All righty, good.